Hey, everybody. Happy Saturday. I am sports mental health empowerment coach, Dr. Lauren Pitts. This is the amazing colleague of mine and my co host, mental health counselor and former student athlete, Ronnie Ransome Jr. And this is House Talk Pregame. But, Ronnie, I got to ask a question first before we jump in.
What's
I
up?
want to know why it's 21 degrees in Fort Worth. I don't understand. And I
Well,
had looked at the temperature that y'all have on the East Coast, and I am I am I am feeling extremely distressed and emotionally vulnerable because it's cold. My kneecaps are cold, Ronnie. Kneecaps. I got my heat on fatal fire in my house and I'm freezing. I don't understand what's going on right now.
it's funny. I remember us having this very same conversation last year around this time when you had first moved to Texas, and I had said, well, it seems like New Jersey made sure that you didn't miss them too much when you went to Texas. So it seems like you brought some of that cold winter down there with you. Now the Texans down there might have to have a conversation with you, but I mean, how else can Mother Nature make you feel at home other than bringing, the one thing that makes New Jersey different? Just that
It's eroding my
cold.
sense of self, Ronnie. It's eroding my sense of self. It is making me have a diminished capacity to function properly because it is so freaking cold in Texas. Why? I don't
It's,
understand. And you know what we have here for snow plows? Tractors with a scraper thing on the front.
oh, oh,
What what in the wide world is that? I don't understand. I'm I don't. I don't
it, it,
understand why there's no snowplows here.
it's crazy. It really sounds like your emotional well-being is taking a toll due to this cold weather. And, speaking of emotional well-being, we know it's important to any athlete's success academically, athletically, socially, and spiritually. Untreated mental health problems can result in undue suffering, diminished positive effect, and balance in life. Most psychiatric disorders in student athletes improve and resolve with proper treatment, just like proper treatment for those roads can help resolve Dr. Pitts' mental health.
Trying to tell you, I'm feeling some type of way. And to many athletes, being mentally tough means never showing weakness. I've had a hard time with that this week. Never admitting that you're not okay and never sharing your mental health struggles with anyone. Unfortunately, these decisions can have disastrous consequences. The good news is that a lot of people in an athlete's life, from coaches to parents to fellow players, can make a positive difference when it comes to mental health. When athletes properly care for their body and their mind, they do far better in their athletic performance and in life.
And that's why here at Pregame, we discuss why it is so important for athletes to take care of their mental health, from why mental health matters to how to get to proper treatment and so much more. This is what it's all about here at Pregame, heightening mental health awareness. Mental health is a lot more than simply the absence of mental disorders. It also involves a constant and active effort towards maintaining happiness and your mental well-being.
It really is all about optimal mental health, because it's the fundamental component to an athlete's ability to enjoy their life. To achieve this, it is essential to strike a balance between one's personal and professional responsibilities, social life, and daily activities. However, several external factors such as the weather, I'm just saying, several external factors, such as the need to maintain social and financial standing, lifestyle choices, living someplace warm, and other biological factors can disrupt the delicate balance and lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. I'm experiencing all of those this week because it's freaking cold. I'm just saying. Just want to put that out there, let the world know I'm having a crisis.
You gonna make Jack Frost real self conscious about himself bringing this cold weather to Texas.
He's gonna need therapy by the time I get done talking about him.
And it's crazy as important it is for Jack Frost to maintain his mental health. Is just as equally important for our athletes to maintain their mental health to balance the pressures to succeed and perform well during competitions. While more and more athletes and coaches are beginning to come around and recognize the importance of mental health in sports, unfortunately, mental health still historically has been an unspoken issue within the realm of athletics, but not here on Pregame. So not only can you join our discussion live, but you can also catch us on HSRN every Saturday at this very same time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. and at 10 p.m. as well on Saturday nights, and also at Sunday on 6 p.m. And remember, HSRN is empowering the HBCU families head, heart, and hands to deliver the impact we all know it can. So don't forget to catch our lineup of other great shows on the network as well.
That's right. And we also want to invite you to join us each week as part of the virtual audience. If, we would love to have you by registering via the Zoom link that's available on all of our social media platforms, or you can email us at htpregame@gmail.com, because we really do want to hear from you. We know that there's things that you want to talk about. We know that there's things that you want to hear about. We know there's things that you want to learn about. So please, 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 we want to hear from you.
Exactly. And, with it being February, not only, first and foremost, February is Black History Month, first of all.
Yes.
Black History Month, even though Black history is all 365 days of the year, because without Black history, there would be no history. But a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. On top of it also being Black History Month, it is also my birthday month. Shout out to all the Aquariuses out there. Shout out to all of us, first half of February. Also, it is, the Lovers Month, Valentine's Day this month. So with that being said, we want to kind of also, as much as we talk about our student athletes, coaches, parents, and all that, having great mental health and great emotional awareness, for their athletics, their academics, social life, and things like that, it's really important that we also take time to help our student athletes understand the importance of love and relationships and the emotional intelligence involved in love and relationships. So we're going to talk about why emotional intelligence matters in romantic relationships and how you can use it to strengthen your partnership, increase intimacy, stay connected, and build a love that lasts. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, along as well other things during the month related to, love, emotions, relationships, all these things that oftentimes we just kind of throw to the wayside, and we really don't understand how things that we've learned from childhood can affect us as adults, student athletes, professional athletes, so on and so forth. So we got a lot of great things to talk about today. But first and foremost, Dr. Pitts is going to kick us off with her wonderful, and I think everybody, whether you're at home right now, go grab a pen and paper. If you're driving, pull off to the side of the road, grab some pen and paper, because Dr. Pitts has a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful mental health tip of the week that we all, every single person, whether you're in a relationship, single, married, whatever the case may be, can use. So Dr. Pitts, go ahead and kick it off.
So I want to take people's memory back to science class, Ronnie, and remind them when you had to do the litmus test in science class. That was the liquid was in the test tube and you had to stick the little strip of paper in. And if it turned purple, it was acidic. Well, I want to teach our audience how to do a relationship litmus. And a relationship litmus, in part, is going to tell you whether or not your relationship is acidic. But more importantly, it is going to illuminate for you the relationship patterns and themes that may be existing within your relationship. And here's why this is so important, folks. If you pause for a moment and think about the both serious and casual relationships that you've had throughout your life's journey, one thing rings true. You're the common denominator in every relationship that you've ever been in. And I'm always blown away when people come into treatment or when I'm talking to family and friends or whatever the case may be, and people are talking about, all men are dogs or all women are, that other word and all of these things. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Is that really the case? Or do you have a magnetic draw for people that perhaps validate the low opinion that you have of yourself, or people that affirm all of the goodness and excellence and greatness that's in you? Well, a relationship litmus can help you to get to the root, to the very essence of why your relationships look and feel and evolve the way that they do. A relationship litmus is going to require you to create 3 categories: a needs category, a wants category, and a don't wants category. A relationship litmus, in essence, is actually driven by your value system, your moral code, your belief system, your authentic self. In other words, who you really are at the core of your being. So what you do is you go through each column. We're going to do the needs column first. You highlight everything that you absolutely positively feel that you need to have in order to be in a healthy, loving, and fulfilling relationship. The second column is your wants column. The wants column, I like to call it the icing on the cake column, Ronnie. That's the,
Mhm.
some of that stuff in there might seem more superficial in nature. I can't say what I normally say. It's things that you can put in that there good column. But the wants column is your friend, right? It's your friend. The items that you put in the wants column don't make or break your relationship like the needs column would, because the needs column is your non-negotiables, right? I want to get at
Absolutely.
least 80% of my needs met in this relationship. The wants column, let's keep it real. Cake is good without ice. When it's made right, cake is good
Oh
without ice.
yeah.
So the wants column is your icing on the cake column. That's,
Mm.
things that, what, it would be nice to have these things in a relationship, but if I don't, it's not the end of the world. The don't wants column, that's your red flag column, Rocky. The red flag column says this: you put things in there that you absolutely positively do not want in a relationship. Here's the thing, folks. Even if it's something that you believe is small or seemingly insignificant in any of those columns, put it on there anyway. Because what do we know to be true about relationships? Little things can morph into major things, both positively and negatively, right? So you want
Mhm.
to make sure that even if it seems like it's nippy, you know what? I don't care if he snores. No. Put snoring on there anyway, that that you don't want snoring, or that you need a foot massage, or that you want back rubs. Whatever. Put some of the small, seemingly insignificant things on there in each of the columns, because those things can morph and they can become better, or they can become problematic throughout the course of your relationship.
Mhm.
I want to emphasize, I'm going to start with the don't wants column first and explain it like this. Because this is your red flag column, these are things that you absolutely positively, no matter how small or great, you do not want them. You would rather not have them in your relationship. I want you to try and make each column as exhaustive a list as you possibly can. Anything and everything that you can possibly think of that you need, want, or don't want in your relationship, I want you to put it in the respective column. And then I want you to use a Likert scale. A Likert scale, for the sake of this activity, is going to be from 1 to 10, with 1 being not very important and 10 being extremely important, or whatever it is you may choose to rate it in the middle.
Mhm.
In the don't wants column, if you rate something a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, those are serious red flags that you're going to want to keep an eye on in the event they morph into something far greater and can really become problematic, may result in you have to do an intervention, run for the hills, have an exit strategy, whatever the case may be. If you rate something in that column a 6 or 7, and teeter-tottering on the 8, they are critical red flags that you absolutely positively, you're probably going to want to do an intervention. You may want to go into relationship therapy. So you may want to leave. You might want to do some serious evaluating to determine, do you need to recategorize this relationship? Is this relationship healthy enough for you to continue in? What impact is this relationship having on you? What is this relationship costing you emotionally, physically, financially, etc.? If you rate something in the don't wants column an 8, 9, or 10, that's what
Mhm.
Dr. Pitts calls deal breaker red flags. You need to be seriously considering an exit strategy, because what this is telling you is that this relationship is toxic. It's a problem, Ronnie.
Mhm.
And it's a strong possibility that there's a lot more additional damage that's going to be done if you continue in that relationship. I want to circle back real quick to the needs column. Your needs column is your non-negotiable column, right? You
Mhm.
absolutely positively need to have ideally 80% of your needs. If you can get more than that, woo, woo, you might want to throw a party. 80% of your needs met in a relationship. Ronnie, the problem that people run into is they find themselves in these relationships too often where the substance, the meat and the potatoes of their relationship are primarily in the wants column and in the don't wants column. And what ends up happening is people are walking around in the fog looking all, disturbed and distressed, because the relationship is falling apart. Well, that's because the wants and the don't wants column, they're not foundational pillars to a healthy relationship. They're not foundational things that preserve the integrity, health, and strength of the relationship. You want integrity, health, and strength in your relationship. Your primary focus needs to be in the needs column. And if you're not having those needs met, hello, it's a problem. But what happens, Ronnie, is people are insecurely attached, right? They would rather be with a piece of man or a piece of woman than be with nobody at all. And then what ends up happening is you carry all of this emotional and relational baggage from one relationship to the next relationship to the next relationship. But here's the problem. You're taking you with yourself in every relationship, and you're the common denominator in every relationship. So my encouragement, my mental health tip is do a relationship litmus. And oh, sidebar, you can do a relationship litmus for virtually any type of relationship. Of course, the language that you use is going to be different because the dynamics are different, but you can use it to assess your friends. You can use it to assess your relationship with your parents, parent-child relationship, your employer, whomever the case may be. I want you to resist the temptation to manipulate the litmus. Don't do this litmus based on the relationship that you're in to make it justifiable for you to stay in a toxic relationship. That doesn't make sense. It can be a healing tool that you can use, that if you find that the bulk of your relationship is in the needs category, but there's still some don't wants that are showing up that could erode the integrity, health, and strength of the relationship, then that's room for discussion. That's room for perhaps coming into couples therapy, coming into marital therapy, and actually having discussions around these are the problems that we're seeing. It may be beneficial to have a Dr. Pitts or a Ronnie or one of our colleagues all over the country to help you to flesh out how to bridge the gap and to have a healthier, stronger, more substantive relationship. But I encourage everybody to do this activity. Is it a beautiful activity? I do it myself. It is extremely, extremely beneficial in helping you to break the patterns of finding yourself in these relationships that are not sustainable, that are not healthy, and that are not adding value to you as a person. That's all I have, Ron.
Once again, people, I think a great tip will be to, when this show is over with, like we said, these shows always replay, run that back again, because I think everybody, every single person should do that. Like you said, it's not just for romantic relationships, it's for friendships, parent relationships, parent-child relationships, all these things that we oftentimes, like you said, throw to the wayside because we rather would just have somebody than nobody.
Right. Well, Ronnie,
what's up?
Finish your thought, and I want to add one more thing real quick that I did.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was wrapping up. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what I encourage people to do, even if they are currently in a committed relationship, if they find that that relationship is landing more so in the wants and the don't wants column, my encouragement to everybody for their own benefit, for their own healing, for their own strengthening, for their own authentic self to come forth stronger and better than ever before, use that litmus to evaluate the previous relationships that you've been in, because what it will illuminate for you is where your self-work needs to start. It will illuminate for you, particularly if you find yourself in relationships where you have been compromising your needs. And oh, by the way, then you discover that you're insecurely attached as well. It is going to be an eye-opener for you and illuminate for you what your work-ons are to help you to make that transition from insecure attachment to secure attachment, and really empower you to be able to have the skills and the knowledge that you need to be involved in healthier, more substantive relationships that perhaps can be sustainable. That's all. Absolutely. I wanted to add that to do the comparison and to assess previous relationships.
I think that, and I think a lot of times you hear it a lot where people, like you said, they're the common denominator. There's oh, well, all these people I've dated, they've done the same thing. They've all either cheated on me, they lied to me, I can't trust them, I don't like them. people fail to realize, and I think we'll definitely talk more, more into this during the show about emotional intelligence, but also that, emotional intelligence of self. I think that's the biggest part. But we'll definitely get back to that more in the show. But thank you again, Dr. Pitts, for that wonderful mental health tip of the week. So we have a lot of sports news, HBCU news. So let's go ahead and get started with it. So first of all, we talked about last week how they had the first annual HBCU combine. And so 40 HBCU athletes got to attend. There was representatives from all 32 NFL teams. So shout out to all the NFL teams for having representatives there. So a lot of people showed out. So one of the first big performers there was Virginia State's very own defensive back, Will Adams.
Yes.
Had one of the top performances overall out of the 40 athletes. He ran a 4.57. So he is 6'1", 186, ran a 4.5 40. His short shuttle was a 4.1, which is, for somebody his size and the position he plays, is mind-blowingly fast. His three cone was 6.88, and his bench press was 21 reps, which shows that not only is he fast and fluid, he also has the strength too to jam receivers at the line. Yes, overall, yes, absolutely. Being a 4-year starter at Virginia State and then going to do this right here. Shout out to Will Adams. Proud of you, man. Representing Virginia State very proudly. Definitely, man, this is a big win for the university, and also a lot of other athletes. Other athletes who did well too. South Carolina State's wide receiver Wolverine. Miles College running back Kingston Davis. Southern wide receiver Marquise McLean. Florida A&M offensive lineman Keenan Forbes. And we have a couple other ones. So the scout superlatives that they did. So the best interview goes to Alcorn State quarterbacks Felix Harper and Alcorn State linebacker Solomon Wise.
Nice.
The scout said that they had very high energy and they kept the conversation going. The best hands at the combine goes to Alabama A&M receiver D. Anderson. The best tester, so best overall tester at the combine, goes to Southern wide receiver Marquise McLean. Breakout performance, Virginia State defensive back Will Adams. Best position drill performers, quarterback Harper from Alcorn State and Fort Valley State wide receiver Shamar Bridges. And then the conference that had the best overall performance at the combine was the CIAA conference, thanks to Fayetteville State's Keyshawn James, Virginia State's Javon Frazier, and Fayetteville State's Elvin De La Rosa. So shout out to all these phenomenal athletes for their chance to go out there and showcase their talents at the HBCU Combine. So shout out. I hope they get invited to the NFL Combine or one of the big regional combines. And this is a big first step. And like we always say, you ask for the opportunity, they took advantage of this opportunity. And so now, it's definitely shout out to all those men. Also in HBCU news, but kind of not necessarily good news. So we know that Black History Month started on Tuesday the 1st. And we just talked about this just last month, but just on Tuesday, a dozen more HBCUs have received threats of bombs on campus. Those HBCUs include Jackson State, Kentucky State, Fort Valley, Morgan State, Xavier University, Edward Waters, Howard.
That's my alma mater, Ronnie.
That's the second time they've been targeted. Alcorn State, Tougaloo College, Spelman, who else? Coppin State. I think Norfolk State also as well. Delaware State, Southern, Albany State, Bowie State, and Bethune-Cookman were also received threats. And for the life of me, I have no idea why this is even something that people even do. But from what I read, apparently the FBI has launched a
nationwide investigation.
Like a civil rights investigation. And I think they have arrested or detained 6 people in custody related to these threats and whatnot.
Wow.
What did I see that at? I saw that 6 juveniles named persons of interest after HBCU campus bomb threats. Kids, ridiculous. those out there listening, the juveniles out there listening, making threats on people's lives,
will land you in federal prison.
See, as clinicians, we understand that, your impulse control might not be fully developed because your brain is not fully developed all the way. But let me just give you a little hint, and this will help speed up that process just a smidge. If you hesitate to think, is this a good idea? It's probably not a good idea.
That's right.
If you have to ask yourself, is this a good idea? 9 times out of 10 is probably not.
Right.
So just be mindful of that. You cannot, it's already bad enough, HBCUs, just being open, the things they've had to go through. We talked about in season 1, the history of a lot of the HBCUs and things they've had to go through. And, having bomb threats, that disrupts classes, that disrupts practice, that disrupts just campus life, that disrupts everything.
Impacts mental health, because
absolutely,
it puts people on edge and it makes people fragile.
Because imagine one day, it's always the kid who cried wolf. Imagine one day, God forbid, it gets ignored or nobody takes it seriously, and then there is one. And then what?
Right.
So I think people have to be really mindful. I sometimes I just don't get it with people, what they have on their hearts, what they have sizzling in their spirit. Who hurt you that bad? That's what. Who hurt you?
That you want perfect strangers to pay for all of your pain.
Exactly. And it'll never satisfy or solve that issue for you ever. So glad that all those were not real threats, and glad they were able to hopefully start to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. You can't prevent it all the way, but hopefully we can keep these campuses safe and things like that. So moving on from HBCU news, some football news. So last weekend we had the AFC NFC championship games. Shout out to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams for moving on to the Super Bowl. I'm not gonna lie. In my head, my logic pick says take the Rams. That's my logic pick. But my emotional pick
says Bengals.
I would like
to think they're more hungry.
You said what?
You think the Bengals are more hungry than the Rams?
Honestly, no. But I will say I think all the pressure, all of it, is on the Rams. All of it. They went all in on this football team. I don't think they have a first round draft pick for another 2 or 3 drafts. They don't have
their
any
coach is fine.
He is easy on the eyes, ain't he?
It really is.
He's easy on the eyes.
McVay, you get my vote. It's because you fine. Just saying.
Maybe he's a sight for sore eyes, whereas maybe the Dallas football coach might not be a sight for sore eyes. But
no, but my quarterback is fine now. Now, Ronnie. Always talking trash. Why you always talking trash?
I cannot comment on that one. I'm gonna let you take that one.
I don't never instigate like that. You always messing with me.
But I do think
respectful.
I do think all the pressure is on Los Angeles though. They went out.
But why though? Explain to the audience why you think so.
Because they have made. So when you at the NFL level, college and high school is a little bit different because you're always replenishing every 4 years. You only have talent for 4 years. Where at the NFL, you try to maximize talent as much as possible, and in their mind, you try to maximize the talent you have while they have young contracts and young deals. Because once this team becomes successful, you're not going to be able to keep everybody because everybody wants to get paid. But the Rams made a conscious effort, even going back 3 seasons ago. If we go back 3 seasons ago when they acquired Jalen Ramsey, they gave up, I think, a second and third round. I think a first and a second for him. Then you go out and get Matt Stafford. You gave up 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick to get him because you said Jared Goff can't get it done for us. Then you go out and get OBJ, even though you.
I was about to say he's redeeming himself. He's like, bye-bye, Giants.
you get OBJ and you also get Von Miller. So. When you talk about just talent, they are stacked. The defensive side of the ball is absolutely stacked. So I think the Bengals, I think the Bengals, you know, it's kind of like, you know, hey, we're here. We, you know, I think it would be safe to say nobody on the Bengals. I mean, everybody thinks, you know, I want to get to the Super Bowl. I think if we're being, you know, honest, I think nobody on the Bengals thought like, damn, I think we can make the Super Bowl this year. But they're there. They're a very talented young team. They have a hell of a quarterback in Joe Burrow. They have a hell of a young receiver in Jamar Chase. They played together at LSU, won a national championship together. So, I mean, this is not unfamiliar territory to them. However, I think, you know, they kind of go in there like, well, look, you know, maybe sometimes like, you know, teams arrive early. You know, sometimes teams just like get over the hump earlier than they're supposed to, a year or two earlier. The Bengals kind of like that team that got to the top a year or two early, but that doesn't mean they can't capitalize on this. So, like
you think it's going to be a dogfight?
It's either going to be a dog. Man,
you're not expecting a blowout one way or the other, are you?
My concern is the offensive line of the Bengals. That's my biggest concern. When they played Tennessee 2 weeks ago, they gave up 9 sacks. Now, granted, Tennessee's defensive line is no slouch. Their defense is no slouch in the imagination, but they're not the Rams' defensive line. Right. They don't have an Aaron Donald and a Von Miller on their D line. So, I mean, just off of that, in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, shoot, the Bengals, I mean, the Rams are going to at least get 5 sacks off jump. You know, that's my biggest concern. If they can manage to slow down that pass rush and at least give Joe Burrow a half a second longer to, you know, throw it, because a lot of the times, and I don't want to get too technical in speaking, but a lot of the times, a lot of their routes take time. They take time to develop. They're not just short passing routes, short slants, out routes, and things like that. They got to develop. You got the double move, you got the post slant, post corner, things like that. So those routes take time. He needs time. And I don't know if his offensive line is going to give him that. If they do, cool. Speaking of his offensive line, and the reason I'm holding out hope is because Petersburg's very own Quentin Spain from Petersburg, Virginia. I actually played against him in high school. He's the starting right guard for the Cincinnati Bengals. So shout out to him. That's why also I'm, you know, got to shoot right.
Because you got
to root for the home team. But to answer your question, if it gets to the fourth quarter and it's close, I think we're in for a treat.
Wow.
But
the whole playoffs was like, I don't know that I've ever seen a playoff series that was as crazy as this season was. It was like everything was just down to the wire, and thank God for kickers. Because the kickers were doing it this season. Oh my God.
It's been a very, I can't think of a playoffs, like just an overall collective of playoff games being this good. You get like one of playoffs, like you get one, maybe 2 games in the entire playoffs that are just, I mean, from beginning to end are exhilarating. All the last 6 games, the 2 championship games and then the 4 divisional games the previous week have been phenomenal. Yeah. So, like I said, emotionally, I would like to think that the Super Bowl is going to be high scoring, you know, very good. But logically, if the offensive line for the Bengals can't block, it's going to be a very long day for Joe Cool and them. So, you know, but
shouldn't they be working with him on getting the ball out faster?
I mean, it's not. So, like I said, I think it's the offensive scheme, like their scheme. Like I said, a lot of the times, a lot of the routes they run are deep down the field routes. They're, you know, progression routes, so they take time. Could they adjust their playbook and make it to where, you know, they're getting the ball out quicker and things like that? Maybe some more short routes, maybe some screen routes to kind of slow down that defense, make them guess. I will say this though: if Joe Mixon can get running and stuff, if they can get a good running game established, bring those safeties down a little bit, so that way Jamar Chase and Higgins can kind of get over their head and stuff like that. They have a legit chance. Like I said, they have legit talent. Like, don't get me wrong, the Bengals have legit talent, but that Rams defense, like,
bringing it.
And so that's my thing. Like, the one defense that Cincinnati did play in the playoffs, because we know Kansas City's defense is trash. Yeah. And we know the Raiders defense wasn't that good. But the one defense they did play, the Tennessee Titans, they got to them 9 times. And, you know, and so the Rams have the #1 defense in almost every category. So I'm just like, I don't know. It's going to be really good though. I think
Okay.
it's going to be a really good Super Bowl. I think even the halftime show they got Kendrick, Mary J. Blige, Dr. Dre, a couple other people. I think that
Snoop.
the halftime show. Oh, Snoop Dogg too. Yeah, I think they're gonna
Yeah,
have a
Snoop.
really good
It's
show.
going to be all that. I am forecasting that it is going to be one of the highest viewed Super Bowls of all time.
Well, just last week the NFC Championship game, I think they had 55 million viewers.
Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be. I think the viewer ratings are going to be really, 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 really high for this one. I really do.
It's
So
going
we'll
to be really
see.
good. And so the other last couple of things we have in football news. So also sadly in the NFL, arguably the greatest football player to ever touch a football retired on Tuesday. Tom Brady retired after 22 years of playing the NFL. And I'm not going to lie to you, of course, everybody has to hang their cleats up. Everybody has to walk away one day. And I mean, even at times, I have also been on that wave of where, you just hate to see him win so much. I've been like that too. But I also understand, like, to do what he's done for 22 seasons, like, that's...
He about to just soak in some Epsom salt for the next 6 months.
I don't, and Shannon Sharp said this on Tuesday as well, and he made a great point. He was like, the reason he was really sad to see Tom Brady retire is because they didn't make him retire. Like, he just led the NFL in passing yards and touchdowns this season. It's not like Brett Favre. Like, when Brett Favre played for the Vikings the year that they met the Saints in the NFC Championship game, and the Saints about decapitated him on the field. Like, Tom Brady didn't have to deal with that. Like, so, and I think, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, I honestly believe, like, Tom Brady could have came back next season, probably done really well.
You're not expecting him to do a Brett Favre though, because that was my thing. I was like, is he really going to retire, or is he going to get that itch? Because it's not like somebody won't sign him.
Oh, yeah. So the thought was that, so technically, if he were to come back, the Bucs would have to trade him because he had a year left on his contract. So if he does come back, technically he has to come back to the Bucs. But they were saying that, the Bucs might, like, the Bucs were not trash. They weren't doing well before he got there. He gets there 1 year, gets them a Super Bowl. So they were saying, well, San Francisco needs a quarterback because the thought is that Jimmy G is up out of there.
I'm forecasting him to go to Pittsburgh.
No, he don't need to come to Pittsburgh. No.
I think he's good, but that's where I think he's going to end up.
No, we need somebody else because that he not it. He not it.
I think he's going to Pittsburgh.
No, he not it. Going back, go to Miami, go to Houston. No, don't come to Pittsburgh. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. But they were saying, that he might possibly go to San Francisco because he's from the area, he's from the Bay Area, and things like that. So, but it's Tom Brady said something, I think 2 seasons ago, that, when you put it in perspective, it kind of like really highlights why a show like this is important, because even him, like Tom Brady, like when I think of Tom Brady, I would like to think that what more can he accomplish in the NFL that he already hasn't? Like, I mean, you've won 7 Super Bowls, you've seen everything. I would like to think in 22 years, there's not anything a defensive coordinator, a defense, anything that somebody has created that has made him like, oh, well, that's new. Let me go ahead and do this again.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to need professional help to adjust. Like he said, I'm going to need professional counseling in order to adjust to life after football. And, one of the things I've always said, and, I haven't played football. This is coming up on 8 years this summer, but even 8 years later, like I still haven't found anything that gives me that same joy and, fire that football did. I have passions now, I love a lot of things, but that right there, I always tell people it's hard to describe. Like, I mean, of course, it's an identity, it's a thing, it's a game that we play as little kids and stuff like that. But it means so much. I have a tattoo on my back that says it's more than just a game. Like it really
sounds
is.
like emotional intelligence in the love of football to me.
Absolutely. And so, I think for somebody like Tom, I don't know if he will stay retired or not. I think he'll walk away. I don't think he'd be one of the people that will switch back and forth. I think he think kind of like Kobe, you know,
I'm
I
done.
did everything I can do. I left it all out there on the field. And if I can't give it my absolute all, if I can't give it 100% of my time, then I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit there and just fall by the wayside just to say I stayed in the NFL till I'm 50 or whatever. So, shout out to him in his career. Like I said, arguably one of the greatest football players of all time. Top two, bare minimum. He's top two, whatever you say, whatever position, he's top two football players of all time.
Do people even remember Bledsoe anymore?
Very rarely. Very rarely.
They don't even remember.
And it's crazy because he wasn't a terrible quarterback. He wasn't a terrible quarterback. He was not a terrible quarterback at all.
I was like, do people even remember him anymore? Like, did they even know they remembered he existed?
And so my last thing, because I know we got to get moving on, but I know we definitely might touch on this more as news comes out. But I think something that even overshadowed Tom Brady's retirement news is the news that came out from former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores, where he has a class action lawsuit against the NFL, the Giants, the Broncos, and the Dolphins. He accused the Dolphins of, firing him because he refused to lose games. He accused his owner of offering him up to $100,000 per loss if he lost those games so they could have a higher draft position. He accused the Giants of just interviewing him to satisfy the Rooney Rule, even though they had already had their coach picked out 3 days before. We found that out thanks to Coach Bill Belichick, because he accidentally texted the wrong Brian. And also he accused the Denver Broncos, John Elway, and whoever their other person is that interviews coaches, accused them of showing up to the meeting disheveled. Was the word he used, was disheveled. And he's basically saying that, that these NFL owners, these 32 NFL owners, are only interviewing people of color just to satisfy the Rooney Rule. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Rooney Rule, not to get into too much detail today, but the Rooney Rule is essentially a rule that is in place to make sure that these NFL teams are doing their due diligence to interview people of color for head coaching positions, general manager positions, things like that, positions of power within a football team. That's the rule. However, as of today, there's only one Black NFL coach in the entire league, and that's Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Outside of that, there are no active African-American or any people of color coaches in the Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera is a person of color. So just him and Mike Tomlin are the only two people of color in the league. Oh, and all right, so we're just gonna keep this at Black, all right? Because there are three. Because we got Robert Salah of the New York Jets. I think I want to say he's Middle Eastern. I want to say. I know he's a person of color. Not 1,000% sure though. But yeah, so I mean, we're gonna see more news come out over the coming weeks and stuff like that. And honestly, people were trying to compare what Brian Flores did to Cap, and I think they're two different things. I think Colin Kaepernick was ostracized and outcasted from the NFL because he took on a social justice issue, whereas Brian Flores is, no, I'm attacking you, the NFL. Like, no, you are doing this to me. I mean, yeah, society already has there's stipulations and stigma and stuff like that, but I'm saying I'm accusing you 32 NFL owners of literally just having this good old boy system established and refusing to change it, refusing to hire people of color, people you are well deserving of jobs, and you refuse to hire them. So we'll definitely get more updates on this as this comes out, but I think, as we talk about more about Black History Month, I think it's important that we highlight, a lot of these great African Americans and people of color who have done wonderful things in sports and stuff like that. So shout out to Brian Flores for taking this step, putting his coaching career on the line. He's only, in his 40s and stuff, and he's putting his coaching career on the line for other African American coaches who, have just kind of, they felt like, well, it's either my job or nothing. So, I understand why they do what they do, but Brian Flores is really taking a step out there to, say, nah, we got to fix this.
Wow. Let's talk about emotional intelligence, Ronnie.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So you want to kick it off? You want me to kick it off?
I do. I think that it's important for our audience to know. I mean, some people probably never even heard the term until we brought it up. Emotional what? So just like you have your IQ, your emotional, your intelligence quotient, you have an EQ, your emotional quotient, which means your emotional intelligence within the context of relationships. So just to sum it up, your emotional intelligence is a recognition of different emotional states. It's assessing the effects of emotions on behavior, and it's the ability to switch into the best emotional state to manage a specific situation. So when you look at what that looks like in sports and within the game, as well as emotional intelligence in love and relationships, it's not rocket science. I don't know if you have figured it out already, but the higher your EQ, the more emotionally present you are in the relationship within, in the experience. The lower your EQ means that you're emotionally unavailable, and that is not the healthiest place or space to be in sports or in relationships. So it's definitely something we're going to flesh out for you, and we're going to load your toolbox up today so that you can understand how you're showing up emotionally in your relationships, and if you need to raise your EQ.
And another way I like to call it is emotional maturity. And
Yep.
Oftentimes we when we hear people, especially us as clinicians, when we have sessions with people, we always hear, oh, well, I am mature, I am grown, I do this, I do that, and all that. And I'm like, okay, cool. All right, you got a job. All right, you pay bills. Okay. All right, that's maturity in the essence of being an adult. What about emotional maturity? What's your emotions like?
Right.
And
look, are you 12 in your marriage?
You'd be surprised how many people get stuck, or they really sit there and think like, well, I'm such and such age. I guess I'm that age too with emotional maturity.
No,
and you're like, let's
not.
see. So I like to bring this awareness to people because we always talk about, within relationships, it takes two people to make a relationship work, but it takes two healthy people, physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, because oftentimes you hear people say, oh, well, if you got two people in a relationship who love each other, things will work out. Love, I always like to tell people, love is a secondhand emotion, meaning that something has to happen in order for you to register it. Oh, well, this person must love me, or this must be what love feels like. But getting there, let's take a step back. What are some things that you think, Dr. Pitts, can stunt or inhibit somebody from recognizing and growing their emotional intelligence?
Trauma. Trauma, being insecurely attached, meaning that the person, when they were a child, experienced a fractured relationship with their parent and primary caregiver. Adverse childhood experiences that may not fall in that category of trauma, but they were still adverse enough that they impacted a person's ability to mature emotionally. Substance use and abuse. And unfortunately, what we know to be true clinically is that we see clients all the time that have this perfect storm of all the things that I just said. And I think that it's on those occasions where you have a perfect storm of all of those things that it can be catastrophic,
Absolutely.
for a person's emotional well-being in those times in their life. I think another one too is people not being aware of their authentic self, not having an idea of who they really are at their core because they have a fear of abandonment, a fear of rejection, a fear of failure. So they go through life being more in tune to being a people pleaser, which, as we know, erodes one's sense of self, and you spend more time worrying about who's approving of you and who likes you and who's mad at you and who accepts you and all of these things. And all of those things can greatly, greatly diminish someone's emotional intelligence, i.e. their emotional maturity.
Yeah. And I think to your point of, going back to trauma and things like that, oftentimes we don't really understand until we get older, like how much, watching our parents or our caregivers, grandparents, whoever we were raised by,
Yeah.
we often overlook that that's our first look at a relationship. That's our first look at, well, not necessarily intimacy, but, intimacy in the sense of closeness,
Right.
sharing moments together, doing things together, affirming
Learning
each
how to
other.
be emotionally present.
Exactly. Learning, watching them, talk to each other, listen how they do that. Oftentimes, if you've never been around that, you just see, sometimes you'll see arguments, you'll see yelling, you'll see arguing, fighting, you'll see things being thrown, you'll see words being spewed out to each other that you're just like, yo, like, how can y'all sit there and say y'all love each other, but y'all talking about each other like this?
Right.
And for whatever
Don't forget
reason,
the gender element.
Say that again.
Don't forget the gender element. You provoked that thought. I didn't mention that, but how you all are parented as boys also can serve to erode your emotional maturity, because you so oftentimes boys are told to not cry. Boys are told to stop acting like a little girl, as if to suggest that being female is the only reason why emotions are present in life. And that's just simply not the case.
No, absolutely right. Thank you for mentioning that. And that's very true, because I think I always like to tell people, as children, when you're a child, the emotions that you feel as an adult are the very same emotions that you feel as a child. The only difference is that as you get older, your brain develops more and your brain is able to help rationalize or process and acknowledge feelings that are present. When you're a child, you have these feelings. And I always tell people, often they're called feelings because it's something that sometimes you just can't describe.
Right.
For kids, they have these intense feelings of doubt, of worry, of concern, watching their parents argue with each other, watching grandparents argue with each other, caregivers, whatever the case may be, yelling, the cursing, calling each other out their name. I mean, you'd be surprised some of the things that you think kids don't hear, and then they end up repeating it. I know somebody who, they said, him and his baby mama, they were having an argument. And, they were saying, they said some words to each other that should not be repeated by kids.
Right.
And so one of his daughters, I think 3 at the time, he told her to, go upstairs and get ready for bed. And she said, no, B. He said at first, initially, he just got mad. He was like, yo, like,
who you talking to?
Yeah, who are you talking to? But he said he stopped for a second and was like, why did you say that? Where did you hear that from? He was like, oh, that's what mommy calls you when she's trying to talk to you. And he was like, no, like, and he said from that moment on, he was like, he made it a point to not have any other intense discussions around his daughter, because he was like, at 3 years old, she was already picking up, the tension, the angst, the resentment that they had towards each other at times and things like that. Kids feel that, kids pick up on that. And oftentimes right there, I'm not going to say everybody, but a good majority of people run into this issue where, you're raised by parents who themselves may not have the emotional intelligence necessary to help you understand these things. And I always like to tell parents, nobody's telling you as a parent that you can't get mad, you can't get flustered, you can't get upset, you can't have a bad day, you can't have a weak moment or a vulnerable moment or anything like that. Nobody's saying that at all. However, and like we talk to our clients as clinicians, we have these feelings for a reason. Like, feeling angry is not a bad thing. Feeling sad is not a bad thing. Feeling depressed is not a bad thing. Those can be tools to help you at times. However, oftentimes we negatively associate those feelings with negativity. When you get angry, you automatically associate that with being somebody did something wrong to you or somebody's trying to hurt you and things like that. So when you have that mindset of these emotions in a relationship, oftentimes people go on the defense, because at the end of the day, I'm in this relationship with this person because I have chosen that I want to be vulnerable around you. I want to be I want to be myself. I want to be my truest self around you. But if I feel like when I'm my truest self around you, you judge me, you criticize me, and things like that, I'm gonna have reservations. I'm gonna be defensive and things like that. And these things start to build up over and over time. And when you lack the communication or you lack the emotional intelligence to recognize these situations and bring them out to you and your partner, these things fester over time. And then it can be something so simple as leaving a bowl on the counter. You and your partner ready to file for divorce.
Ronnie, let me flesh that out further for our audience from a clinical perspective, because I think that it's really important. You made a great point about anger. What a lot of people don't understand is that anger is a secondary emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at anger as the tip of the iceberg, what do we know to be true about icebergs? The mass of the iceberg is underneath the surface of the water. Well, the same thing applies with your emotions. The tip of the iceberg is anger, which is why a lot of times the authentic emotion that when Ronnie talked about, feeling disrespected, feeling, sad or depressed or frustrated or disrespected or devalued, you want to be able to take the time to not fall for the smoke and mirrors that is oftentimes coming forth as anger. You want to be able to go deeper within yourself and put your finger on the pulse of what is really the root emotion that you're feeling that's manifesting itself as anger. The second thing that I want to point out is I want to drop another gem for folks to help them piece this all together. When you talk about emotions and emotions not being bad and people perceive emotions as good, thank you for making that great point. Because something else that our audience needs to be aware of is I'm going to teach you how to do a comparison. And the reason why I call it a comparison is because I want you to be able to clearly identify what your values are. If I were to ask you just off the cuff, what matters to you most? That's what our values are, right? What matters to you most? You're going to be able to tell me off the top of your head. But if I asked you 5, 6, 10 times what really matters to you, that's going to require you to go deeper to that deeper place and space where your authentic self lies, right? And you're going to be able to clearly define what your values are. I also want to encourage you to clearly define the emotions that you experience throughout the course of your life. And then my encouragement to you is to then further acknowledge the emotions that you find yourself experiencing the most. Then I want you to do a comparative analysis between your values and your emotions, because what's going to illuminate itself for you is a relationship between the two. And here's what you're going to learn. Anytime you experience a negative emotion, for example, chances are you're going to see where one of your values has been dishonored. Likewise, and in contrast, where your positive emotions are experienced, you're going to see a relationship to where your value system was honored. Where negative emotions are concerned, you need to be honest with yourself about why you're either allowing that value to be dishonored or why you're dishonoring it yourself. Because if you're not careful, dependent upon the severity of how deeply your value is dishonored, not only will it lead to a negative emotions, but it will also lead to emotional pain, which can land you in divorce court, can land you in a domestic violence situation, can land you in a breakup if you're not married, can land you in all sorts of funky situations that further diminish your EQ and make it very difficult for you to be emotionally present in a substantive, positive, productive, healthy way within the context of your relationship.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And, I think even speaking about, for now talking about maybe, our college athletes and things like that, I think this is really big because oftentimes, and me being a victim of this myself, not having a good definition of what a healthy relationship looks like between two people, like I've always told, my parents are getting ready to celebrate 32 years in April of being married. But, I've learned some things from their marriage and their relationship and things like that I would definitely do differently, and so because of that, that's often easier said than done. And to your point you made earlier about, especially from a men's perspective of, I was definitely part of that generation where, you didn't show emotions. You didn't cry. If you cried, you were weak. If you talked about emotions, you were soft and stuff like that. So I was brought up at the tail end of that part. But now that I'm an adult, I always like to tell people, I think the weak men are the ones who refuse to acknowledge their emotions, especially the ones that we consider the sensitive emotions, the feelings of being hurt, being embarrassed, being ashamed, being let down, being, having our vulnerability exposed and stuff like that. Those emotions right there, I think a weak man chooses not to address those emotions and face them head on and have something in place for when they feel those emotions. Whereas a strong man, you not necessarily embrace those emotions, but you don't run from them. You take them head on. When you feel like, I always tell people, when you feel sad, like, I just don't know why. I do know why. I think from a historical perspective, I would say, like, this is one of the first times in probably a very long time where, even though there are wars going on all over the world. And so when I say that, I'm speaking just from, I guess, from an American perspective, because I can't speak for the rest of the world. What I will at least say here in America, American men are not necessarily where war and like world wars and stuff like that are a constant, where we always have to defend ourselves on a constant. Even though in this country, I will say, just as far as safety goes, you definitely have to be alert. But for men, like, I think oftentimes the stigma is, well, if you're an emotional man, then another man can take a man who refuses to tap into their emotions will just, they'll just rule you and take over you and stuff like that. Because what do we always hear in business? In business, there's no emotions.
So
you have to make decisions not based off emotions, off of logic. And oftentimes as men, we can make decisions with logic and things like that, but you have emotions for a reason. Women aren't the only humans who are equipped with emotions. We have those very same emotions too, because they're useful. Like I said, emotions are a tool. It can be a powerful tool if used in the right way. But if your emotions have been vandalized, if your emotions have been hurt over time, and you don't learn a healthy way to deal with those emotions, for men, what's the one thing? I've had to learn this, even in some self-disclosure. Even me and my dad's relationship, I've had to learn I'm an emotional person. I have no problem sharing my emotions. My dad is the complete opposite, but I understand. He grew up doing Jim Crow. He was attacked by somebody who was a full Jim Crow believer. He was attacked by a full-grown German Shepherd as a child and things like that. So I understand his mindset of how he views the world and things like that, where back then, as a Black man, you couldn't afford to have emotions. You couldn't afford to be emotional and things like that, because you could literally lose your life. However, one of the things that I've learned as an adult is that, sometimes I feel like maybe he's gotten stuck in that mindset of it's me versus the world. I have to be on guard with everybody. And because of that, when it came to emotions, my dad did not do emotions at all. We didn't talk about emotions. To this day, I tell people all the time, I've never seen this man cry one time. I know he has feelings. I know they're there, but as far as showing them and expressing them, you got a better chance of hitting the lottery than seeing this man show emotions. But I understand why. But oftentimes, so many men, especially people of color, men of color, who oftentimes aren't allowed to have their emotions because you either the first generation where you actually made it out the hood, or now you can be safe and things like that. We're always on guard. We always feel like we have to protect our emotions from other people, because we think that if I show you my emotions, you might use them against me. And we have to get out of that.
Safe. You have to create. It has to be a safe space in order for people to be emotionally present.
Exactly. And I think as men, we have to get out of this mindset of, if I show my emotions, I'm a weak person, or I can't lead my family, or I can't lead other people. I just think that's BS.
I want to flesh it out further clinically for him.
Go ahead.
I want you to envision and I'm trying to do it. I want you to envision two interlocking circles. I'm sucking at doing it this way.
I know the comparison little chart.
Yeah, the two interlocking circles, and on one side you have your emotional mind, and on the
Mm-hmm.
other side you have your rational mind. What you want to do is try to create balance so that you find yourself in this little teeny tiny circle in the middle. That's
Mm-hmm.
where your wise mind is. And that it's in that place and space that you can strike a healthy balance where you can be emotionally present, but not overly so. And you can be rational and logical without being overly so. Because this is what I tell people: relationships, in intimate, loving, whatever type of relationship dynamic, whether it's you and your partner, you and your parents, you and your children, you and your friends, your colleagues, you and your coaches, your teammates, or whoever the case may be. Relationships are not intellectual exercises. They're not. They are relational, and relational relationships require emotional presence. Period. You have to be emotionally present in order to have a healthy, balanced relationship where you're going to be able to preserve the integrity, health, and strength. And you have to be able to show emotion other than anger.
I had a question for you. I was just thinking about.
Sure.
What do you say to the teenager or the young adult who, and I know I know you've probably seen this in your practice too. We know that when teenagers get to a certain age, teenagers feel like, they got the world figured out. I got it from here. Parents don't know what they're talking about, things like that. What do you say to the teenager who comes up in a family who doesn't have, whether it's a single parent home or even if they have both parents, but both parents are quote unquote toxic. They don't have good emotional intelligence for each other. And what do we know about teenagers? Teenagers get to a point where they see their parents or they see the adults who are caring for them and they're like, yeah, y'all can't take care of me like I need y'all to. They might not say that, but their actions show that. So how do you help a teenager rationalize that I might not have a great example of what a relationship is like at home, but I don't want to go out here and make the same mistakes?
That's what mentors are for.
Mm.
That is absolutely positively what mentors are for. As you were saying that, I was thinking, I never recall ever seeing my mother cry until I was an adult. I don't know that I've ever seen my stepfather cry, ever. Never. And you all know I've never met my biological father. So I don't know. Something interesting when you talk, so in essence, what I'm saying is I came from that background. I remember the only time I ever saw my grandfather cry was when one of his baby brothers passed away. I had never, and it came, my uncle had died very suddenly. And it caught my grandfather off guard. And I literally can see that day in my mind's eye as clear as the day is long. That was the first time ever I had seen my grandfather cry. I never, ever saw my grandmother cry. She never cried. I never saw her cry, ever. And when I reflect on conversations that I had with her sister, who, my great aunt, who was just one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life. And I remember my aunt Pauline saying that my grandmother just never showed emotion, ever. When they were kids, just they had a traumatic upbringing. They went through a lot, as you can imagine, growing up in, in the early 1900s, and the Great Depression and all of that stuff, and being girls of color and the whole nine yards. But my grandmother had 11 children, and a number of her children passed before she did. February 3rd was the anniversary of her death in 2019. And when my grandfather died, I never saw that woman cry, ever. The answer to your question is this: what was instrumental in helping me to learn how to access the depths of my emotional self beyond anger and rage, because that was the only emotion that I was connected to for many, 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 many years, was mentors. But more importantly, Ronnie, I started seeing my first therapist at the age of 18, because I knew, for as amazing and wonderful and awesome as the Pitts family was, there was stuff. There was stuff that was traumatic. There was stuff that was deeply painful that nobody taught me how to process those emotions properly. And I think the reason why they didn't teach me was because nobody taught them. When you think about that generation, right? When I think about my mother and her siblings and my stepfather and his siblings and their parents, you know what I mean? Who taught them? Nobody taught them, and they didn't have the resources available to them that we have today. And I've said before on the show, I remember saying to my mom, I think I need to talk to somebody, because I needed that neutral party that I could feel safe with, to be totally vulnerable and transparent, that was going to be instrumental in helping me to process all the trauma and all the pain. And I was a walking volcano. I was the epitome of rage. And my fuse was like, you know how you burn a candle all the way down and the wick is just attached to the little silver thing? That's where my fuse was. It was like I didn't even have a fuse. I was 0 to 100 in 2.3 seconds flat. And I had a violent streak that was out of this world, because nobody ever taught me how to properly access, process, and handle my emotions in an effective way. So the long-winded answer to the question is mentorship, sponsorship, therapeutic support will be instrumental in helping these young people to break the cycle and to be the change that they wish to see in their family system.
Yeah, and I appreciate you answering that. And because oftentimes we see, people will go looking for love in the wrong places.
Right.
And especially, from a man's perspective, I always tell people men have to have other men in their lives, healthy,
Absolutely.
positive,
Absolutely.
outstanding men, like real men in their lives, because it's not easy to be a man in this world. It's not easy when you are expected to do certain things. You're expected to, lead a family and stuff like that. You need that proper guidance and to see what that looks like and how that works, because things come up. But some things I wanted to talk about is like, how can you start to help your emotional intelligence in relationships? One of the first things you can start to do is actively seek change in your relationship.
Yes. Yes.
Oftentimes what do we always hear? Change is on the other side of fear. So if you find yourself in a relationship where you are fearful of having conversations with your partner, if you are fearful of addressing those red flags that Dr. Pitts highlighted well in, her mental health tip of the week, if you are fearful of standing on your boundaries, on your self-care, on your self-awareness and stuff like that, then you won't see the change that you want in a relationship.
Right.
And so actively seeking out that change in relationship. Look, I think oftentimes people also get caught up in the fact that, especially, and I will say that I don't know how it was for you in your 20s, Dr. Pitts. I don't know what, how it was for your generation, when y'all was in y'all's 20s and whatnot. But what I've noticed in my 20s and the people in my 20s is that for whatever reason, especially, I don't know if this was like this back then, but now it's like you get to like, I don't know, 25, 20, almost 30. For whatever reason, people have this notion of that, oh, if I get in a relationship, you got to have all this stuff figured out. Like you got to have all that baggage. You got to have all that figured out before we even start dating. And I'm just like, where the hell do y'all get this unrealistic expectation that somebody's supposed to have their whole world figured out
before 30?
Before 30, like, just please tell me where that exists at. Now, granted, should you have, I always tell people this, when you turn 18, when you become an adult, it is on you, only you, to address traumas that have happened to you as a child and things like that. It is on you. Can't nobody else address that for you. It is on you. Now, if you are dating somebody and it clearly sees that, okay, they have not even began to address these things and they don't even want to make step to address it, all right, cool. You have it there. But just to expect somebody just to have it figured out, a lot of times I always tell people, like, you have the audacity to sit there and have the expectation if you sitting in my chair telling me somebody else got to have it figured out.
Can I piggyback on that?
Go ahead.
Because I think that, I think people are delusional when it comes to, no, I did. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful or offensive. Like, we've been doing this work for a long time. So I see some crazy stuff. But I think that folks are delusional because here's the deal. When, you saw the face that I made about my 20s, right? So I want to point out, to piggyback on what you were saying, what's necessary, the skill set that's necessary to build emotionally intelligent romantic relationships, right? So you have to have an astute emotional awareness to avoid mistaking infatuation or lust for lasting love. And we could talk, that's a show all by itself, right? Because you're getting into secure attachment. You talk about looking for love in all the wrong places. And just because, the chemistry is off the charts, you think, oh my gosh, I love him. No, that's lust. Acceptance to experience emotions that could harm a relationship if left to fester, and vigilant active awareness to apprise us of what's working and what isn't. And all of that circles back to my tip, right? Doing the relationship litmus so that you can assess the relationships that you've been in and figure out how you're showing up, because you're the common denominator. In my 20s, Ronnie, there was a whole bunch of stuff that I hadn't figured out. How could I? There was still so much that I didn't know. I hadn't lived. It's like, to that point, all I had made was a bunch of freaking mistakes. So how could I possibly have it all figured out? And here's the thing, I'm going to make a public service announcement. So to everybody that's listening, I just said it a few minutes ago, everybody has heard me say for the past 4 years since we've been doing House Talk that I have never met my biological father. Well, guess what? I still have never met him, but I found out a couple of weeks ago who he is. So I tell people, and I said this to both of my parents, and it's been a whirlwind of a couple of weeks. I don't have daddy issues anymore, Ronnie. I do not have daddy issues anymore, because thank God for Jesus, the information that has come forth and the love and support of my family, my husband, my children, my friends, everybody that loves me and cares about me, that prays for me on a daily basis. When I say they rallied around me when I found out, but the reason why I bring that up is because paternal absence was a major, major, major contributor to me having a low EQ, because I was just all jacked up. I had major, major, major daddy issues because every fiber of my being said, what's wrong with me? That my daddy didn't love me, that he chose to not be a part of my life because it was his choice. It's not like he didn't know that I existed. I had a stepfather that loves me beyond measure, and a grandfather and uncles and all of that, but there was still this tremendous void. And because there was an entire part of my existence that was missing, I thank God, and I am eternally thankful and grateful that that void is not there anymore. There's questions that I will never be able to have answered, because I did find out when I connected with the paternal side of my family that my father passed away in 2004, God bless his soul. But it literally, Ronnie, if you like the temperature of the weather on a thermometer, you talk about my EQ going up. It was, and I was already, because of the self-work that I've done, my EQ was pretty high, but it was like the mercury bursting the bulb of the thermometer. And I say that very humbly and very graciously, that there's so many things that can erode, but to your point, don't be delusional and think that you're levitating and walking on water and you got a heaven or hell to put somebody in, that you hook up with somebody at 25, 23. I'm 54. I'm 54. And just found out 2 weeks ago, this tsunami of information about this void that I carried my entire life. You know how many bits and pieces and stuff and family secrets that go on in people's lives? How is it humanly possible for somebody to have it all figured out before they're 30? Stop tripping. Stop putting that unrealistic expectation on yourself and those you find yourself in relationships with. Learn how to meet people in a place of common humanity with an open heart and an open mind. And oh, by the way, how about loving people past their pain instead of adding to it? How about that?
Mm. Uh, that right there alone takes somebody with an emotional intelligence to understand that and be able to do that. And which leads me to my next point. View the challenges you encounter as opportunities rather than problems.
Yeah.
Your courage and optimism allow you to view dilemmas not as problems, but as challenging opportunities. How creative can the two of you be? So relationships all have problems. No relationship is just peaches and cream. Mm-hmm. And I think also a detriment to relationships and love and things like that has been social media, because what we know about social media is everybody always posts the good side of them. Mm-hmm. Social media is a place of unrealistic expectations, unrealistic achievements, unrealistic goals, because at the end of the day, social media allows people to view themselves as something that in the real world they know they haven't achieved, or they feel that they can't achieve. Yeah. So even in love and relationships, oftentimes people always post a good thing. You don't see people posting about, me and my wife just got in an argument last night. I called her a hoe. She called me a deadbeat, things like that. They don't post that and have a loving picture beside each other. They post 11 pictures talking about, oh, I love my wife so much. She's the best thing on the earth. And
she's the most beautiful person I've ever met in my life.
Exactly. And so problems exist. However, in a relationship, if you have problems, if you have issues that come up, you have to have a plan with each other on how to address these situations. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes, if a significant other is going to come to you with an issue, and this is going to lead me into my next point too. If a significant other comes to you with an issue, and even for myself, I've been working on this too, because oftentimes people come to us with issues not for the fact that they want a solution, they just want to be heard.
That's right.
And
that's that emotional boundary, Ronnie.
Exactly. And so oftentimes where issues become problems is because when people are sharing their emotions, oftentimes when you share emotions, you think emotionally. I'm hurt. I'm sad. I feel like you didn't do this. I feel like you're doing that. I don't feel like you do this enough. Things like that. When you think from emotions, and somebody, when we share our emotions, we don't want resistance. We want acceptance. Mm-hmm. But when those emotions are met with resistance, that person who is being emotionally, they feel attacked.
Right.
So emotionally, they put their walls up, and emotionally, they challenge you back, because now you have dismissed their emotional feeling as, oh, you're attacking me.
Mm-hmm. For the person that's feeling attacked, a tip that may help you to be able to combat that is, don't address the person, address the behavior. Meaning being called out of my name makes me feel disrespected. I didn't say, when you call me out of my name, you make me feel disrespected. Take the you out of it. Take the emphasis on the person, because it's the behavior that is problematic. Yes, the person demonstrating that behavior, but if you take the you out of it and focus on how the behavior is making you feel, then it can minimize the likelihood for either party to get defensive and everybody to go into attack mode.
I'm right. I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna try that one today.
He's so crazy.
Try that one today. But that's a great point, because it leads me to my next one. Respect all the feelings you have for each other.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, the ugly. Mm-hmm. Respect those feelings, because I always tell people about feelings, and I say this in the most empathetic way possible, because at the end of this, I mean, you can argue with me, argue with your mama is what I'm gonna say. Mm-hmm. But feelings are not facts.
And they flee.
Feelings are
Of
what they
bipolar
are.
disorder.
Feelings are exactly what they are. They are something you feel in that moment.
Right.
A feeling is not something you feel all the time.
Right.
You know how hard it would be to be angry 24/7? You know how hard you
I was
have
like
to
that for a long
try.
time.
You have to
Just mad
try to
about
be
everything.
angry.
Just mad about
20.
everything. Why the darn sunshine?
So
I wanted to rain today.
I tell people all the time, you can express how you feel. All right. And when you're in a relationship, you should be able to have that space with you and your partner where you can express how you feel. Understand just because that's how you feel does not mean that is right or that is valid. It is a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think too, I definitely want to talk more about this because I think a lot of people, I've been victim of this too. I think a lot of times, like, people share their feelings, but people want those feelings validated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to validate feelings that feel to be attacked.
Right. Yeah, that's
why
why
relationships.
we got to do a show because we got, what is it, 2 weeks when we're doing a show on conflict resolution, and
Yeah,
we'll talk more about it in that, because that's what it's about. It's like getting out of that defensive posture that puts everybody in attack mode and take from there. And we got 4 minutes.
yeah. So my last couple things are: keep the laughter in your love life. Super important. Super important. Laugh. Watch a comedy. For the younger couples, send each other memes, TikTok videos, funny video, whatever.
Don't take yourself too seriously.
Exactly. Don't take life seriously because you're not going to get out of it alive. So
at least 20 times a day, Ronnie. At least 20 times, and I'm not exaggerating. At least 20 times a day, Eric says, "What is wrong with you?" He's already said it to me 3 times today, because I'm always laughing. Always. I can be serious when I need to be serious. I will confess, though, there are times that he says, "Can you just be serious for a minute?" Because I believe laughter is medicine. I'm not going to go off on a tangent because we got to bang them out, but laugh at yourself, laugh at him, laugh at her, laugh at the kids, laugh at the dogs, cat, laugh. It's medicine for your soul.
Exactly. And my last one is pay attention to how you feel when your lover is not around. And I think this is a very good one because oftentimes, and
that's a red flag. If you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad he's gone. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad she's gone." It's a red flag. It is a red flag. Don't want to
it is a red flag. And I think so, to your point, and I think the opposite of that can also be a red flag is if you, I'm not going to say obsessively, but if you
insecurely attached, that anxious, preoccupied. Go ahead, say it.
If you miss them to the point where you feel like you can't do anything when they're not around you,
that's a problem.
Might be a cause for concern. But however, but if that's how you feel, then you need to pay attention to that and acknowledge it and recognize that, why do I feel like this when this person is not around me? I always tell people, a relationship.
But beat up.
A relationship
is who not gaslight, Ronnie.
Huh?
I said, who am I gaslight? Look, we all in the don't want scholar. Go ahead, I'm gonna be serious. Go ahead. Focus.
I always tell people, when it comes to relationship, it's not meant to complete you. It's meant to complement you.
That's right.
A relationship is a complement to what you already do for yourself and who you are as a self. So if you recognize that when your lover is not around or your partner is not around, that you are glad or super glad they're not around, or you're super sad they're not around, then that needs to be a conversation between you two, because something is missing there. Something within yourself is missing, whether it's that self-awareness, that self-love, that self-respect. If you are feeling like those things can be lacking, those things need to be addressed individually, so that way the relationship does not suffer. So those are some things that you can start to work on to really start to heighten you and your partner's emotional intelligence. That's all I have for everybody. Dr. Pitts, go on and close us out.
Yep, I'm gonna give them the real quick tips on how to love smart. I want you to let the 3 gauges, feeling energized, mentally clear, and more loving generally, of your well-being, inform you about the romantic choices that you make. I want you to let your lover know what you feel. honestly, transparently, authentically. I want you to listen from emotional experience. I want you to show the support and love that your lover needs. When in doubt, ask. Don't assume that I'm feeling whatever. Because you are going to be transferring and projecting your feelings onto me. Be prepared to work at the relationship because, yes, relationships do require effort on everybody's part. Learn from your partner. Watch out for emotional memories. That's the bad stuff that creeps up in the baggage you carry in from previous relationships. Remember that the only problem with making mistakes is not owning them, and use change as an opportunity to grow your relationship and your emotional intelligence.
Well,
How's
ladies
that?
and gentlemen,
How's that for knowledge?
that's all we have for today. We hope that you take some of these tidbits that we've dropped off Dr. Piss's love litmus questionnaire, our tips on emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, all these tips. Run this episode back. Sit down with your partner, your loved one, family, whatever the case may be, and run this episode back, because I think it's important within our community to really, really, really strengthen these relationships with each other, because we all we got at the end of the day. So love one another, be there for one another. And once again, you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for tuning in. As always, we'll catch you back here next week, same time, same place. And that's it. Y'all be great.